Good afternoon. I'm Carolyn Johnson, and we're here today with some great news for you. Most of you, like me, have been told that you get a lot of great tax advantages when you work for yourself, even if it's a part-time home-based business. Well, the good news is someone has finally written a book in plain English to teach us what these huge tax breaks are that we can qualify for as owners.
And I'm Tommy Johnson, and I'll bet none of those well-meaning people ever told you what those tax advantages are, or how to qualify for them, or what records you'll need to keep. I'm not a number cruncher kind of guy. To be honest with you, I hate taxes, and I especially hate reading about taxes. But when I first saw this information, I was absolutely blown away by how easy it is for this business I am already running to qualify me for some really big tax savings.
So Tommy and I tracked down the author of this tax saving guide, which is appropriately titled, "It's How Much You Keep That Counts, Not How Much You Make."
We're sitting here today with Ron Mueller. Ron has a bachelor's degree, 2 master's degrees, an MBA, and a PhD. So clearly, Ron knows how to do the thorough research.
Sitting here looking at your book, It's How Much You Keep That Counts, and showing that it's your 4th edition, maybe you could kind of tell us how come a fellow that's not an accountant or a CPA would come to write a book like this?
That's a great question, Carol. In fact, I didn't really come to write a book. But what I came to do was to be in business for myself. And about 7 or 8 years ago, I was tired of following taillights and sucking up exhaust fumes and decided I want to work for myself. And like you, I'd always heard all my life you get a lot of tax breaks when you work for yourself. So I went to the library to find a book that would tell me how big those tax breaks were, because what I was trying to figure out was how much money I'd need to make in order to be equivalent to what I was making as an employee. Well, I couldn't find a book that gave me that information, so I went online to look for it. I went to Amazon.com, I used search engines, I did everything. I couldn't find it. I even went to the Library of Congress because at that time I lived near Washington, and the Library of Congress has a copy of every book ever copyrighted in America, and it wasn't there. So I said, okay, I got to figure it out myself because, see, part of my background is I've been an investigative reporter. Investigative reporter is simply somebody who lets every lead to another lead to another lead. And so what I did was I started tracking down the tax breaks that I thought were correct, that I'd heard about, and I tracked them back to the individual tax code article or congressional law or tax court ruling that authorized it. And then I got intrigued because I'd found 2 or 3 of those. How many more are there? And I just kept going, and it got to where I was now like 6 months into doing this part-time, and somebody said to me, you know, millions of people need this information, especially network marketers, because there's so many tax breaks they can qualify for that they don't even know about. And that was frankly the first time I ever thought about turning it into a book.
Wow.
I turned it into a book so that I could share the knowledge that I'd gained the hard way and deliver it to people in a way that they don't have to work the way I did. Nobody wants to study taxes. They find it boring, and so I need to deliver it to them in a way that they can understand it quickly and easily and use it right away.
Well, you're absolutely right. As you were sitting there saying millions of people need this information, I'm sitting here thinking millions of people need a Ron Mueller, because I am not a research person. So we really appreciate the time you've taken from your schedule. I know you're a busy person to be with us in the studio today. You know, you've recently completed, as I said, the 4th edition of your book. Well, I know this, Ron. Your tax savings guide helped me this year personally. It helped me with saving thousands of dollars in my taxes. You know, since the tax breaks you describe in your book are so easy to use and the tax savings are so huge, I have to just ask you, are these tax breaks really legal?
That's a great question because everybody worries about doing something about their taxes. And there are so many people that overlook legitimate tax breaks just because they're afraid of the IRS. You're always afraid of something you don't understand. But what I can assure you of is that I've taken each one of these tax breaks back to its origin. And so I've even found the logic behind where they came from. See, Congress passed a series of tax break legislation specifically to encourage people to get into a home-based business. Now, why'd they do that? Well, they started discussing this many, many years ago, probably almost 20 years ago. The first time we had mass layoffs in this country where IBM, McDonnell Douglas, and Boeing are laying people off by the thousands. So, and it threw our country into a recession, almost into a depression. I don't know what the difference is between those two, but I do know that a lot of people didn't have much money. And so it threw our country into a serious economic problem. So Congress sitting around trying to decide what can we do to lessen the impact of this next time it comes around, because history tends to repeat itself. Well, they said, well, if everybody had a home-based business, we'd all have a backup plan. If you went to work tomorrow morning and you got a pink slip that you didn't know about, or you didn't know was coming, what would you do? Most people would go home and start working on their resume or have a beer or try to forget it or something. But what you would do is you'd go home and say, okay, my Zango business, I've been working part-time, let's crank it up to full-time. It'll buy me time while I look for another job. funny thing is a lot of people don't find another job because they find out they can have more fun, more time freedom, make more money by cranking up their part-time business to full-time, so they never go back to work. But that's the reason why Congress passed this legislation. So they asked themselves, how do we get people to get into a home-based business? We know that's good for the American economy, but people are overworked, overstressed. Some of them have 2-3 jobs already. How do we convince them to do a home-based business? Well, most people are motivated by money. I mean, money's not the most important thing in the world, but it kind of ranks right up there with oxygen. And so Congress said, if we can't pay people to get into a home-based business, what can we do? And they said, then the light bulb came on, the aha. We can pay people. We can pay them in terms of giving them tax breaks, give them really significant financial incentive to take the time to start a home-based business. Some of them are going to make it really successful. That takes away a lot of taxes, of course, initially. But some will make it hugely successful, and they'll end up paying way more taxes than they would have otherwise. And we've got that foundation of that security blanket that if our country goes into economic problems again and there are mass layoffs, people have something else they can do immediately. They don't have to study it because you've already done that. You already understand the product and the services. So that's why Congress passed these tax breaks. So absolutely, of course, they're legal.
Okay.
Ron, I have a real estate background, and I'm very familiar with the tax break that the IRS give us for owning real estate. If these tax breaks for home-based businesses were all passed into law by Congress, why don't most people know about them? Not even my own tax guy.
Well, that really requires a two-part answer. The first part is why most people don't know about these tax breaks. And the answer that I've concluded is that when Congress passed these tax laws, they didn't pass any PR plan or advertising plan to tell people about them. Normally, the media would announce these things, but for some reason, the media didn't make a big deal out of them because most of these tax breaks were sandwiched into larger tax bills, and the media simply didn't pull it out. And it's not even tested in the CPA exam. So if a tax preparer knows about small business tax law, it's because he or she is self-taught in that area. See, most people don't know what they don't know. And so an accountant has a reasonable right to believe that everything you learn in accounting school, the things that are tested in the exam, are in fact the most important things that they need to know. There's a big category they don't know, but they don't know it, if that makes any sense.
Right.
Absolutely.
So as a result of that, maybe 5% of tax preparers really understand this because they're the ones who have decided to carve out a specialty in this area, and that's why they taught themselves the small business tax law.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Give us just one example of a tax break that has a huge dollar value and is also got very easy record-keeping requirements, which we all don't enjoy doing.
Chapter 7 of my book is called The Key to Your Biggest Single Deduction May Be in Your Ignition, because the biggest single tax deduction for most people is their automobile. Using your automobile for business purposes can yield huge tax deductions. For example, the average person will get, for every 2 miles you drive, you get about $1 worth of tax deduction.
Oh, wow.
That's pretty significant. Yesterday, I drove 400 miles to come here for this conversation we're having, and that 400 miles resulted in about $200 worth of tax deductions.
Whoa!
So it's significant, the amount of tax breaks you can get with a home-based business, coupled with use of your vehicle. Now, you asked about the record-keeping requirement. It's so simple. I'm amazed that a lot of people don't take this tax break because they think it's too complicated. The record-keeping is too complicated. Here's how simple it is, Carolyn. If you get in your vehicle and I get in my vehicle, I fasten my seatbelt, I turn on the ignition, and then I pull my vehicle mileage log out in front of me. I have to write down only 4 things. Today's date, that's usually the hardest one for me. Then I write down the odometer reading. I read that right off the dashboard. I look right through the steering wheel, write it down. And then I write where are you going and why are you going there. So what's your destination? What's your primary purpose? That's it. I write that down every time I turn on the ignition, but only for 90 days. I don't have to do it all year long because the IRS has ruled that you can use a statistical method to determine your deductions. So during this 90-day period, for example, if I find that 87% of my total miles traveled are business miles, I can now claim 87% of all of my miles for the entire year as business miles. And that multiplied by 48.5 cents a mile is a big deduction.
Well, that adds up in a hurry. I had no idea you only had to keep track for 90 days.
Ron, last night you and I were talking, and you made mention to the fact that if your vehicle gets at least 7 miles to the gallon, that you, in a sense, can get paid to drive your vehicle. How does that work?
Well, that's right, because you get approximately $1 worth of deduction for every 2 miles you drive. And so if the price of gas, let's say gas is $3.50 a gallon, even $3.50 a gallon even, you only have to drive 7 miles in order for that to total to enough money to pay for your gas. So literally every time you fill your gas tank, it costs a lot of money, but it's a little less painful to pay that money when you know you're going to get back multiples of that in tax breaks.
I'd say a lot less painful. Somebody told me that all I have to do is put a magnetic sign on my vehicle promoting my business. All of my miles would be deductible. Is this true?
That is one of the most commonly held misperceptions about tax breaks. In fact, it's so widely misunderstood that the IRS has actually issued a clarification on it, and they said that they've said that if you put a magnetic sign in your vehicle, 100% of the cost of that sign is deductible. Of the sign.
The sign.
That's all. Has nothing to do with the vehicle deductions. What's the car being used for? Now, in theory, if you were driving your car around in order to be a traveling billboard, then it could be all deductible. But at the price of gasoline, who in the right mind would do that? So no, it's not. It's not deductible. But you bring up a good point. There's more misinformation than accurate information about small business tax breaks, and people are trying to take the wrong breaks. They just don't understand the law.
Gotcha. For many of us, a lot of miles that we put on our vehicle are for commuting to and from a job. Commuting isn't deductible, is it?